Happy Halloween. Oh, fuck. There are so many monsters. But did you ever notice that some monsters have so many movies? But which ones are the best? How about I go through a bunch of monster movies that have been pretty well represented in film and give you my favorites. And some runners-up while I'm at it. Now, my one ground rule is that these movies actually be horror movies. Because over the years, a lot of these monsters have been in movies that are not horror movies. We're leaving the out-and-out monster comedies at home. Also, there are a shit ton of home-release horror movies out there, so for the purposes of this video, I'm just going to limit this list to theatrical releases. And of course, there may be some mix and match. Some of these monsters fit into more than one of these categories. In those cases, I'm going to put them where they fit the most easily or where they make the most sense. And I'll also say I'm going to try and make sure there's no major spoilers in this review, but I'm going to have to talk about some minor ones to, give my opinion of the film. So I'll say no major spoilers, but there will be some minor ones that shouldn't affect how you watch or appreciate the movie. So do you recall the most famous monster of all? Vampires. Since Dracula was first published in 1897, vampires have never faded from popularity, which is kind of incredible. Werewolves, mummies, and Frankensteins come and go. Their popularity waxes and wanes. But vampires have had staying power in film since film began. Unfortunately, most of those films suck. But some of them don't. The most famous vampire is, of course, Dracula. But there have been just as many vampire stories told without him as there are with him. So I'm gonna do something a little different. I'm gonna pick my favorite Dracula movie, and then I'm gonna pick my favorite vampire movie that does not include Dracula. It's easy to pick my favorite Dracula movie because there's only one I've ever liked. Horror of Dracula, which was the first major remake of the Universal Dracula by Hammer Productions. As a matter of fact, the Hammer films remade a bunch of the Universal monster movies, and for some of these monsters, I consider the Hammer versions to be the definitive versions. If you recall my Movies I Hate That Everyone Loves video, you'll remember I'm not a fan of most of the classic Universal monster flicks, with a couple exceptions. This includes Dracula. I don't like the original Dracula. Absolutely nothing is shown in this movie. It's slow, it's boring, there's no music. I don't even like Nosferatu, a silent movie whose choice of music is comically not appropriate for a horror film. And Bram Stoker's Dracula, which claimed to be so faithful to the book, really isn't. I've read the book. I don't remember Lucy getting railed out by a gorilla in a graveyard. Do you? Yeah, that was the part that lost me on that one. But Horror of Dracula, while not a perfect movie, is satisfying because every scene you think is in every other Dracula movie is in this one. There is blood. There is neck biting. There are stakes and hearts. There is sun melting. It's great. Would be nice if Dracula spoke up a little more, but whatever. But it's not my favorite vampire movie. There are two that stand above it, one of which is Interview with the Vampire. This movie is amazing. The protagonists are the vampires, which is rare, and part of the horror comes from how awful being a vampire is. You live forever, you have to kill people to survive, and can never see daylight. But it's still not my favorite vampire film. My favorite vampire movie of all time is Fright Night, the classic tale of the vampire next door and the boy who no one believes. This movie unlocks the vampire mythos to its full potential. We see them melt, we see them get staked, we see them draw blood, we see them transform into all sorts of shit, and the effects are incredible. This is a film that was both critically acclaimed and a cult classic, which is hard to pull off, but one thing it definitely is good movie. Mummies. Hammer's The Mummy. This is by far the greatest Mummy movie. It is a wild improvement over the original, mostly because there's an actual mummy in it going around fucking killing people, which is all I want from a Mummy movie. In the Universal movie, the mummy is only in the first 5 minutes, and then it turns into an awful love story. This movie is what everyone actually thinks of when they think of mummies. A mummy walking around squeezing the fucking life out of people. And, like all the other Hammer flicks, it's got Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee just being incredible actors. Frankenstein, and/or Frankenstein's Monsters, and/or The Reanimated Dead. Yeah, Frankenstein usually rules this category. But there are non-Frankensteinian monsters in this category too. They just haven't had good movies. I actually wish that there had been a good film adaptation of Pet Sematary, which is definitely the best novel in this genre. But because all the adaptations of this book suck, we're gonna have to default to Frankenstein. So what is the best Frankenstein movie? Well, this was probably the toughest decision on this list. Because of course, The Curse of Frankenstein, which is the Hammer version, is great. But believe it or not, Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein are two of the few Universal monster flicks that I actually genuinely love. These two films are so much better than Dracula, The Mummy, The Wolfman, and all the rest that it's a crying shame that they get grouped together so much. James Whale was just such a better director. So which of these three movies is the best Frankenstein film? Well shit, let me walk you through it. Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein have the better monster. Hands down. Because Boris Karloff kills it in this role. Get it? Because he kills people. But no, seriously. In The Curse of Frankenstein, Frankenstein himself is really the monster. Peter Cushing is center stage in this one, while Christopher Lee's monster is really secondary. But Dr. Frankenstein in this movie is definitely a horror movie villain and a humongous piece of shit. So which of these is the best movie? God, it's hard to choose. I have to delve into really minor details in order to pick one over the other. But The Curse of Frankenstein is the best, for only a couple reasons. One is that the Universal Frankensteins do get cheesy at times. Like in the first one with the announcer in the beginning, the second one with Mary Shelley actually being in the movie, and Dr. Praetorius's tiny people experiments. These do detract from the scares. The other is that in the Universal movies, neither Frankenstein nor the monster are truly evil. The monster is like a child that nobody taught right from wrong. Only the first half of Bride of Frankenstein even is really a horror movie because the monster learns that murder bad. And Frankenstein himself learns from his mistakes. In the Hammer Frankenstein, he's just an evil fuck, and watching what he does is more horrifying. So there you have it. Hammer wins again. Werewolves. None of them. Seriously, I haven't watched a single werewolf movie that I've actually fully enjoyed from beginning to end. I've watched The Wolfman, An American Werewolf in London, Silver Bullet, Curse of the Werewolf, which is the Hammer version, and I still didn't like it. An American Werewolf in London is probably objectively the best one. It has the best transformation sequence, but I feel like it's barely a werewolf movie. There are ghosts in it, and the car pile-up sequence is more horrifying than anything the werewolf does. Silver Bullet's initial concept is pretty good. I like the idea of a werewolf movie leaving the werewolf's identity a mystery until the end, but this movie blows the reveal halfway through. Leaving the identity of the werewolf as a big twist would have been dope! How is it that R.L. Stine has written a better werewolf story than all these Hollywood hotshots? Aliens. Let's be real, it's universally accepted that there are two alien horror movies that stand above all the others. And we all know which two those are. So which movie do I like better? Alien or The Thing? And my answer is The Thing. Although Alien is a very close second. I think from an aesthetic standpoint, the Xenomorph is the scariest looking monster probably on this entire list. But I think The Thing is a scarier movie. Alien takes a little longer building its atmosphere, with the chest-bursting scene being the big holy shit moment, and then the rest of the movie playing out like an extremely well-made slasher flick that is actually better than most of the slasher flicks I'm about to mention. But in The Thing, every scary moment is like the chest-bursting scene. They all make you go, holy shit. And to this day, The Thing is one of, if not the scariest film on this entire list. The atmosphere, special effects, setting, and pacing are fucking perfect. The Ennio Morricone soundtrack gives you dread right from the get-go. The behavior of the characters is uncharacteristically intelligent for a horror movie, and it has one of the greatest endings of any movie, horror or otherwise. It's a perfect horror film. Zombies. I hate zombies. They're slow, shambling idiots that don't use any weapons other than their hands and teeth, and yet they somehow always manage to take over the world in almost every movie they're in. But there was one movie where they actually felt like a threat, and it is by far the greatest zombie film ever made. And that is Zack Snyder's remake of Dawn of the Dead. This movie made zombies fast, aggressive, and the closest they have ever been to scary. This film was such an improvement over the original and zombie movies in general that I don't know how it doesn't get more credit. And it came out before the zombie craze really took off, so it gets credit for not existing out of trendiness. Great cinematography, great characters, great pacing, which is what kills horror movies more than anything else. This one is a classic. Slashers. The monster that has spawned by far the most movies of any monster, and the only one who is more defined by the rules of horror filmmaking than by any actual legend behind the monster itself. Slasher flicks are a dime a dozen, but no two slasher villains are completely alike. You could really subdivide them into two categories: human and supernatural. Your human slashers include Psycho, Texas Chainsaw, Saw, minus the Texas Chain, all of the killers from Scream, the early Friday the 13th movies, etc. Your supernaturals include A Nightmare on Elm Street, Child's Play, Hellraiser, Candyman, and the later Friday the 13th movies. But the greatest slasher film of all time, which you could probably guess before the word even leaves my mouth, is of course Halloween. And one of the big reasons for this is because Michael Myers is a human being, but he treads the supernatural. Dr. Loomis constantly calls him pure evil, and he's shown to survive all kinds of injury. It's a very uneasy place to tread. And being this unstoppable force of pure evil is what made him so iconic. This movie is incredibly well directed and acted, the point of view shots are still impressive, and this is the one out of all the slasher flicks that people still talk about the most. But some quick runners up, I do love Candyman and Saw, which are my personal runners up. Child's Play, Nightmare on Elm Street 1 and 3 are both great, the first two Screams, Texas Chainsaw and Psycho are awesome. This genre has a lot to offer when it's good, and it would take me an entire separate video to talk about all the runners up for this category. Witches. You may think, well, this one's easy, there's only one witch movie. I know. You'd like that, wouldn't you? You'd like me to give it to the Blair Witch Project. It's definitely the most iconic horror movie about a witch, but there's only one problem with that. And this is a major spoiler, so fast forward like 20 seconds if you want to skip it. You don't ever actually see the witch. The witchcraft is never confirmed. And so I can't give this movie its prize. Instead, the prize is going to go to Rosemary's Baby. Yes, Rosemary's Baby is a witch movie. People forget that because of the ending, but the driving force behind everything in it is witchcraft. This movie is so good because the witches basically use their black magic to gaslight the shit out of this poor woman. Ghosts. Now, ghosts are tricky because they bleed into some of these other genres, and also because they're generally the least threatening monsters on this list. I mean, they're spirits made of air, how can they hurt you? That's the challenge of a good ghost movie, which is probably why there aren't many good ones. But I can easily tell you my favorite, and it is probably the movie that still scares me the most on this list. My favorite ghost movie of all time is The Ring. Yes, the American one. Ringu isn't really bad, but it's meh. This movie is the definitive adaptation. This is probably the least violent movie on this list, and yet the threat of death feels so urgent, because the characters have a curse hanging over them. It nails the atmosphere, which is something all of the best horror movies do. I even love the filter it uses, which I like to affectionately call Pacific Northwest filter. But it also nails the imagery, which is the scariest thing about this movie. There's only one oh shit moment in the film, but there are many moments before that which get under my skin. Like the videotape itself. Drippy black and white images make me uncomfortable, mostly because of these books. But when you find out the story behind these images, that deeper horror sets in. Throw in a great twist ending and you have a ghost movie that stands way above its rivals. A runner-up to this is The Sixth Sense. Sixth Sense? Sixth Sense? I hate the fucking name of this movie, but it's a great movie. This movie really examines the horror of what it would be like to have to see ghosts in everyday life. And I mean, out of all the twist endings on this list, this one probably is the greatest and most well-known. Demons. and/or possession movies. Unfortunately, a lot of these movies use the possession angle, and these all suck. Except for that one time it didn't. Yeah, that's the one. The Exorcist is awesome. Do I think it's the scariest movie ever made? No. It's definitely a slow burn. This movie really takes its time with things. And the story is very run-of-the-mill. It was probably original when it came out, but this has been done to death since then. But it all pays off. When this movie came out, heads turned. It was, and still is, probably the most shocking mainstream horror movie ever made. And not shocking like jump scares, but shocking like the crucifix scene. Haunted house, or town, or, the setting is haunted. The bad place. There have been a couple really good movies in this category, and a lot of really bad ones. Like the Amityville Horror. Holy shit, that movie is garbage. But the best one is, of course, The Shining. But before you go, hey plebe, there are ghosts in the movie. Doesn't that make it a ghost movie? Let me ask you this. Who made all these ghosts commit murder and suicide while they were alive? The Overlook. Who keeps them trapped there when they die? The Overlook. The Overlook Hotel is the monster in The Shining. This movie gets a lot of praise for being shot in such a way that everything about it feels wrong. And by wrong, I mean right. Even when there aren't hauntings on screen, there are all these little tricks in the set work and camera work that just make you feel anxious. Like the color palettes of rooms, the tiles in the halls, the way the camera will zoom out on a character instead of in, revealing how fucking big and empty the room is and how small they look in it. And then when the stuff finally happens and you see things that shouldn't be there, instead of the tension being released, it just fills you with more dread. This movie is the best Bad Place movie because of how much attention was paid to the little things in it. I always notice something new every time I watch it, and for better or worse, it is definitely the most analyzed movie on this list. But I do have a couple runners-up that deserve a mention. The Bad Place film that I thought came really close to knocking The Shining off its pedestal is a little movie called As Above, So Below. Most of these movies I watched when I was younger, but this one I only just saw a couple of years ago, and it scared the fucking shit out of me. As a grown adult, easily the best found footage movie I've ever seen, and taking place in the Paris catacombs, talk about the perfect setting, this movie is a claustrophobe's worst fucking nightmare. It's incredible. Another one of my favorites is The Haunting, a very subdued horror movie where you're never sure how much is actually happening and how much is just happening in Eleanor's head. The smallest things become creepy in this movie, like hand-holding. Cosmic or interdimensional. This category is so hard to define that I'm surprised that there are as many entries as there are. And a lot of these entries do bleed into other monster genres, which makes categorizing them difficult. Even my two favorite movies in this field are both extremely different, and it makes picking between the two difficult. But my favorite movie by a narrow margin is In the Mouth of Madness. Yeah, that's right, John Carpenter is 3 for 3 on this list, baby. This movie is the greatest mindfuck of any film I have ever seen. And somehow, it makes perfect fucking sense. This may have the best screenplay of any film on this list, and it's one that only my guy Sutter Kane could write. The truly close runner-up that almost tops this list is It. Chapter 1. Chapter 2 is good, and yes, I'm aware they are both actually from one story, but 2 is a little too self-aware compared to the first one. Plus, it retcons some stuff, and I fucking despise retconning in storytelling. The first one, though, holy shit. Holy shit, this movie was fucking fantastic. The performances in this movie are incredible, and I still think it's the greatest overall kid casting of any movie. And Bill Skarsgård's Pennywise is probably the most recent, truly iconic horror monster. Speaking of kids, I'll end this video by saying there is a kids horror movie that is also one of the best interdimensional cosmic horror films. Coraline. The only animated film or children's film on this list, Coraline's Otherworld is one of the creepiest settings in film. It's legitimately stressful and unsettling. Still don't think this is a horror movie? Look at those titties. Thanks for watching, dudes. Were there any monsters or monster movies I missed that you think I would like? Let me know in the comments. But not if they're werewolf movies. I think I'm burned out on those. And like, subscribe, and click that Patreon link, baby!